No one noticed her when the night shift turned chaotic. Not when alarms screamed. Not when tempers flared. Not even when decisions were made that would ruin lives. She stood there in plain sight, head down, hands steady, treated like background noise in a place where power spoke loudest. Then the glass doors to the ER slid open. Dark jackets, federal badges, a silence so heavy it swallowed every sound in the room. "We're looking for Captain Hayes," one of them said, voice flat, unmistakable. People glanced around confused, searching for a man in uniform, a ranking officer, someone important. No one looked at her. But she looked up, and in that moment the balance of power inside the hospital shifted quietly, irrevocably. What happened next would expose lies buried under white coats, force the arrogant to look down for the first time, and remind everyone watching that the most dangerous people in the room are often the ones no one sees coming. Before we begin, let me ask you, where are you watching from right now, and what's your local time? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where truth cuts deeper than authority, don't forget to subscribe. St. Catherine's Medical Center never truly slept. Even at 2:17 a.m., the emergency department pulsed with fluorescent light and quiet exhaustion monitors, beeping in uneven rhythms, gurneys squeaking over scuffed tile, the air thick with antiseptic and old coffee. Outside rain streaked the glass like nervous fingers, blurring the city lights into pale smears of yellow and red. She stood near Trauma Bay 3, holding a clipboard no one had asked her for. Her name badge read Emily Hayes, printed in small black letters beneath a title that earned little respect here: Patient Transport Aide. To most people, that meant she moved beds, wiped spills, fetched supplies when nurses were too busy to notice. To some, it meant she was invisible by design, a body to command, a voice to ignore. Emily was used to that. She kept her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even. The habit wasn't accidental. Years of discipline lived beneath the plain scrubs, beneath the scuffed sneakers that never made noise on tile. She watched without staring, listened without appearing to. The ER rewarded those who noticed patterns and punished those who drew attention to themselves. Tonight the punishment was coming fast. "Where's the CT scan, doctor?" Martin Keller snapped, his voice slicing through the din. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and permanently irritated the kind of attending physician who mistook volume for authority. "I ordered it 10 minutes ago." A nurse hesitated. "Radiology said they're backed up." "That's not my problem," Keller cut in. His eyes flicked around the room, landed on Emily and narrowed. "You, transport, why are you just standing there?" Emily met his gaze calmly, waiting for clearance. "Trauma Bay 3 still hasn't been sanitized." Keller scoffed. "Figures. Everyone's always waiting on something." He waved her off like smoke. "Get a mop or get out of the way." A few people nearby smirked. Others looked away. No one spoke up. Emily nodded once and turned without argument, pushing a gurney toward the supply alcove. She felt the familiar heat at the base of her neck, the instinctive response to disrespect, but she let it pass. Anger wasted energy. Energy was a resource she conserved carefully. As she walked, her eyes scanned the ER automatically. 2 police officers stood near the nurses' station, murmuring to each other. One had blood on his sleeve, drying not his. A middle-aged man lay on a stretcher near the wall, pale and sweating, his wrist cuffed to the rail. His vitals spiked and dipped in a pattern that didn't match the chart clipped beside him. Emily slowed. Something was off. She detoured slightly, pretending to adjust a wheel on the gurney while she listened. Said, "He collapsed near the interstate," one officer whispered. "No ID. Phone's locked." The other officer shook his head. "Hospital admin wants him stabilized before we move him." Admin wants, Emily thought. Of course they do. She glanced at the man's face. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Strong jaw. Faint scar along his temple, old surgical. His hands twitched slightly, even while restrained muscle memory firing beneath sedation. That kind of tension didn't come from panic. It came from training. Emily straightened and continued on, filing the observation away. In the supply room, she filled a mop bucket with practiced efficiency. Each movement was economical, precise. No wasted motion. She returned to Trauma Bay 3, just as the overhead speaker crackled. Code Grey. Emergency Department. Code Grey. A ripple of unease moved through the staff. Code Grey meant a combative individual. Security issue. Keller swore under his breath. Great. Just what we need. The restrained man began to stir. Emily saw it before anyone else, the subtle shift in his shoulders, the way his breathing changed. She set the mop aside and moved closer, careful not to draw attention. "Sir," a nurse said sharply, stepping toward him. "You need to stay still." His eyes snapped open. In a blur of motion that stunned everyone watching, the man twisted his wrist just enough to create slack, then surged upward. The rail bent. The cuff didn't break, but the stretcher lurched hard enough to knock the nurse back a step. Shouts erupted. Security rushed in. One guard reached for the man's arm. "Don't," Emily said quietly. No one heard her. The guard grabbed the man's shoulder and instantly found himself flipped sideways, crashing into a supply cart. The second guard hesitated, shock freezing him in place. Chaos exploded. Emily moved. She crossed the distance in 3 silent steps, positioning herself just outside the man's reach. Her voice was calm, steady, pitched low enough to cut through adrenaline. "Sir," she said, "you're in a hospital. You're injured, and if you keep moving, you're going to make it worse." The man's eyes locked onto hers. For half a second, something unreadable passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or assessment. He froze. Keller stared. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. "Get back." Emily didn't look at him. "Sedation is wearing off unevenly," she said, still watching the man. "His vitals are unstable. If you restrain him again, you risk cardiac arrest." The room went silent. A nurse swallowed. She's right." His heart rate spiking. Keller opened his mouth to argue, then stopped as the monitors confirmed it. The man slowly lay back down, his breathing ragged but controlled. His eyes never left Emily. "Thank you," he rasped, barely audible. She gave a small nod and stepped back, already fading into the background as security regained their composure. No one thanked her. Instead, Keller rounded on her the moment the immediate danger passed. "You don't give orders in my ER," he said, voice low with fury. "You overstepped." Emily met his glare without flinching. "I prevented a code blue. That's not your call. Someone had to make it." The words hung in the air, quiet, unyielding. Keller's face reddened. "You think you're smarter than everyone here." Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Silence was often more unsettling than defiance. "Get out of my sight," Keller snapped. "And don't insert yourself again." She turned and walked away, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing into her back. Whispers followed her down the hall, confusion, irritation, curiosity. She ignored them all, but as she rounded the corner near the elevators, her hand brushed the inside pocket of her scrub jacket. Her phone vibrated once. A single message lit the screen. "Unknown number, stand by." "They're moving." Emily's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. So it was starting. She slipped the phone away, just as a hospital administrator hurried past, speaking urgently into a headset. Words floated back, "Federal jurisdiction, don't alert staff yet." Emily slowed her pace, heart, steady mind, already calculating angles and outcomes. They still thought she was nobody. That assumption was about to cost them everything. By 304A, the ER had slipped into that deceptive lull where exhaustion masqueraded as calm. The shouting had faded. The gurneys were lined up again, paperwork stacked like a quiet accusation on every counter. To anyone walking in, it might have looked like the crisis had passed. It hadn't. Emily Hayes moved through the corridors with a fresh stack of linens balanced against her hip, her expression neutral, her pace unhurried. On the surface, she was exactly what everyone expected her to be: useful, forgettable, silent. Inside, her mind was working through contingencies. The restrained man, now stabilized and transferred to ICU, hadn't been random. She was certain of that. His muscle memory, the scar, the way his eyes had clocked exits, even while drugged, it all pointed in one direction. Trained. Federal level trained. And if he was here bleeding and cuffed, then something had gone wrong beyond the walls of Street Catherine's. Which meant the hospital wasn't just a workplace tonight. It was a variable. At the nurses' station, a cluster of staff whispered urgently. Emily caught fragments as she passed. "Admin's freaking out. Police aren't supposed to be here this long. Someone from legal is on the way." She turned into the linen room and shut the door quietly behind her. The room smelled faintly of detergent and metal shelving. Emily set the linens down and leaned against the wall, eyes closed for just a moment. She allowed herself a single, slow breath, in through her nose, out through her mouth. Then her phone vibrated again. Unknown number ICU patient flagged as protected witness. Hospital staff compromised. Emily's fingers stilled. Compromised how? She typed back quickly, keeping the phone shielded from the security camera in the corner. Emily, define compromised. The reply came almost instantly. Unknown. Number internal pressure to alter intake records. Timestamp discrepancies already detected. Emily's jaw tightened. That explained Keller's aggression, the administrator's panic, the way the police officers had been told to wait instead of act. Someone high enough in the hospital chain had decided compliance was more convenient than truth. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and stepped out into the hallway, her face settling once more into anonymity. Across the ER doctor, Keller was arguing with a woman in a Navy blazer hospital administration. Laura Whitman, Chief Operations Officer. Sharp haircut, sharper eyes. Emily had clocked her months ago as someone who never raised her voice because she never needed to. Federal jurisdiction doesn't apply until they're officially here, Whitman said tightly. Until then, this is our patient, our liability. And if the chart doesn't match what they expect, Keller asked. Whitman's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we make sure it does. Emily slowed just enough to hear. Keller hesitated. That's risky. Whitman met his gaze. So is defying people with resources we don't have. Their eyes flicked past him and landed on Emily. She stopped. Yes, Whitman asked coolly. I need access to the ICU linen chute, Emily said evenly. Room 512 requested fresh sheets. Whitman waved a dismissive hand. Fine, but make it quick. Emily nodded and moved on, her pulse, steady her thoughts. Anything but. In the ICU, the lighting was dimmer, the air heavier. Machines hummed in low, constant tones. Emily passed a nurse adjusting an IV drip and gave her a polite smile that went unreturned. Room 512 sat at the end of the hall. The man lay motionless now, chest rising and falling in controlled rhythm. His wrists were no longer cuffed. 2 police officers stood outside the door, arms crossed, alert but uncertain. Emily paused, reading the name on the temporary chart, John Doe. Of course. She turned away, pretending to check a supply cart, and let her eyes skim the glass reflection instead. She caught her own gaze in it, calm, unreadable, older than it should have been. A memory surfaced unbidden. A briefing room, cold air, a voice saying, "If you're made, you abort. No heroics." She pushed it down. Behind her, footsteps approached. Whitman again. You, she said, lowering her voice. What was your name? Emily turned. Hayes. Emily. Whitman studied her face with a kind of calculated interest. You had no right to intervene earlier. I prevented an injury. You disrupted chain of command. Emily met her gaze. Chain of command doesn't stop a heart attack. Whitman's expression hardened. This isn't a debate. I need you to sign something. She held out a clipboard. Emily took it, scanning the form quickly. An amended incident report. Timestamps altered. Witness statements condensed. Her name already printed at the bottom under transport staff on duty. You want me to certify this, Emily said. Whitman's smile was thin. You were there. You saw what happened. Emily looked up. I saw the truth. The air between them tightened. Whitman leaned closer. Listen carefully. You're a support staff employee with no leverage and no allies. Signing that report keeps you employed. Refusing it complicates things. Emily considered her options. To anyone watching, it might have looked like fear crossing her face. It wasn't. It was calculation. I'll need a moment, Emily said, to review. Whitman hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Emily turned and walked toward the staff lounge, clipboard in hand. Inside the lounge, the TV played muted news footage, traffic accidents, weather alerts. Emily sat at the small table, pen resting between her fingers. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, FBI en route. ETA unknown. Stall if necessary. Emily glanced at the door, then back at the clipboard. This was the pressure point. The place where silence either preserved a lie or exposed it. She picked up the pen and set it down. When Whitman returned, Emily was standing clipboard untouched. "I can't sign this," Emily said calmly. Whitman's eyes flashed. "Excuse me, it's inaccurate." Whitman's voice dropped. "Do you understand what you're risking?" "Yes." "And you still refuse?" Emily nodded once. For a long moment, Whitman said nothing. Then she took the clipboard back, her movements sharp. "Fine," she said coldly. "You're off the floor. Effective immediately." Emily didn't argue. She walked out of the lounge under the weight of Whitman's stare past nurses who suddenly avoided her eyes past Keller, who looked equal parts relieved and uneasy. At the exit corridor, she paused. Another vibration. Unknown number. They're inside the building. Emily exhaled slowly. She turned not toward the doors, not toward the elevators, but back toward the heart of the hospital, where lies were still being written and truth was about to walk in, unannounced. For the first time that night, a few people noticed her, and something in her posture had changed. Emily Hayes should have been walking toward the exit. That was what Laura Whitman expected, what Dr. Keller assumed, what the hospital's quiet, unspoken hierarchy demanded. When someone without rank was dismissed, they disappeared. Instead, Emily turned back into the building. The corridor leading toward administrative offices was nearly empty at this hour. The floors here were cleaner, quieter, insulated from the chaos of the ER by design. Emily's footsteps made no sound as she moved, her posture relaxed but purposeful. Anyone glancing up would have seen nothing unusual. Just another employee finishing a task. Inside, her senses sharpened. She passed a security camera and noted its angle. Another camera near the stairwell, disabled, judging by the dark indicator light. That hadn't been the case yesterday. Someone had made changes. That confirmed it. She reached the stairwell door and slipped inside, descending 2 flights to a level most staff never used unless escorted. The air was cooler here, the hum of the building deeper, more mechanical. She paused, listening. Voices echoed faintly from down the hall. "Need those records clean before sunrise," someone said. Keller's voice, tighter than usual. Emily moved closer, keeping to the shadowed edge of the corridor. Whitman replied, sharp and controlled. "I don't care how you do it. If federal agents walk in and see discrepancies, they'll assume intent. And if they ask questions," Keller said. Whitman exhaled. "Then we give them what they expect. Confusion, bureaucracy, delay." Emily felt a flicker of something cold pass through her chest. Delay. That word had ended lives before. She stepped back, just as the office door opened. Keller emerged, rubbing his face, his confidence visibly cracked. He didn't notice her as he passed, too wrapped up in his own fear. Whitman lingered inside. Emily waited 30 seconds. Then she knocked. Whitman looked up sharply. "I told you you're done for the night." "I forgot my badge," Emily said evenly. "It's inside." Whitman hesitated. Then, irritated, she gestured her in. The office was pristine. Too pristine. Not a paper out of place. A wall of framed certifications. A view overlooking the city, dark and distant. Emily stepped inside and let the door close behind her. Whitman crossed her arms. "Make it quick." Emily glanced at the desk, then at the computer terminal. "You're worried," she said. Whitman's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About losing control." Whitman let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't know anything about control." Emily met her gaze. "I know when people start altering records at 3 a.m. They're afraid." The temperature in the room shifted. Whitman straightened. "Careful." "Why?" Emily asked quietly. "Because I'm not supposed to notice, or because I'm not supposed to speak." Whitman took a step closer. "Because you're disposable." Emily didn't flinch. "Then this shouldn't matter to you." She reached into her pocket and placed her phone face up on the desk. The screen lit, showing a secure message thread, nothing incriminating at a glance, but enough to suggest layers beneath. Whitman stared at it. "What is that?" "A liability," Emily said. "Yours." Whitman's composure cracked just slightly. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Emily replied. "But you don't know that, and that uncertainty is already a problem for you." Whitman's jaw tightened. "You think you have leverage. I think you're running out of time," Emily said. A beat passed. Then another. Finally, Whitman stepped back. "Get your badge and leave." Emily nodded, retrieving a plain plastic badge from the desk drawer, one she had placed there earlier, anticipating this conversation. She turned to go. At the door, she paused. "They're already in the building," Emily said softly. Whitman's breath caught before she could stop it. Emily left without another word. Back on the main level, the hospital felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Staff moved more cautiously now, voices lower, glances sharper. Security personnel clustered near the main entrance, tension visible in the set of their shoulders. Emily blended in, pushing an empty gurney toward the ER as if she still belonged there. Near the elevators, she spotted the two police officers again. They were speaking urgently into their radios now, eyes darting toward the front doors. Then the doors slid open. Not violently, not dramatically, just deliberately. 3 figures entered. Dark jackets, neutral expressions. Badges flashed briefly, unmistakably federal. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. The effect was immediate. Conversations died mid-sentence. A nurse froze with a chart in her hands. One of the security guards instinctively straightened, then seemed to realize he didn't know what to do next. The lead agent scanned the room with a practiced, unhurried gaze. Emily felt it before she saw it, that subtle shift in posture, the way trained people recognize one another without acknowledgement. She didn't look at him. Not yet. Laura Whitman appeared from the administrative corridor moments later, her smile already in place. "Good evening," she said. "I'm Laura Whitman, COO of We Know Who You Are," the agent said, cutting her off without hostility. "We'll need access to your ICU and patient intake records from tonight." Whitman nodded too quickly. "Of course. If you'll follow me, we won't," the agent replied. "We'll have them brought to us." Whitman hesitated. "A mistake. We're also looking for someone," the agent continued, his voice calm but carrying. "A federal officer currently embedded in this facility." A ripple moved through the staff. Embedded. Emily set the gurney brake and stood still. The agent's gaze swept the room again. Captain Hayes. The name landed like a dropped instrument in a silent operating room. People looked around, confused. Keller's head snapped up. Whitman's face drained of color, just enough to be noticeable if you were watching closely. No one spoke. The agent waited. Emily felt the weight of the moment press against her chest, not fear, but inevitability. She didn't move. Not yet. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the lie finish collapsing on its own. The silence after the name was spoken didn't break all at once. It fractured. Whispers crept through the ER like a slow leak, confused, uncertain, edged with fear. People turned in small, awkward motions, scanning faces for someone who matched the title captain. A man in uniform. A senior officer. Someone who looked the part. No one looked at Emily. She stood beside the gurney, hands resting lightly on the rail, eyes forward. Her breathing stayed even the way it always did when pressure peaked. Years ago, she had learned that the moment you reacted was the moment you gave something away. The FBI agent let the quiet stretch. He was tall, lean, with the posture of someone who didn't need to announce authority for it to be felt. His gaze moved methodically from the nurse's station to the trauma bays, to security, to administration. Laura Whitman stepped in smoothly, voice warm. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." "We don't have any. We're not here to debate titles," the agent said. "We're here because this facility became relevant to an active federal investigation approximately 3 hours ago." Keller swallowed. Emily saw it from across the room, the subtle rise and fall of his throat. He had gone pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "What investigation?" Whitman asked. "Interference," the agent replied. "Obstruction and attempted manipulation of medical records related to a protected individual." That landed harder. A nurse gasped softly. One of the security guards shifted his weight, suddenly unsure which side of the room he belonged on. Whitman forced a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I assure you we would never, Doctor." Keller, the agent, interrupted, turning his attention abruptly. "You authorized a chart amendment at 241A. M. Correct." Keller stiffened. I adjusted a timestamp for clarity." "For clarity," the agent repeated. "Interesting choice of words." Emily watched Keller's hands. They were shaking now. The agent glanced down at a tablet, then back up. "You did so at the request of Miss Whitman." Whitman opened her mouth, and the agent continued calmly. You listed a transport aide as a corroborating witness. Every head turned. Emily felt the weight of it then, not the attention, but the assumption that she would be the weakest link, the easiest to bend. Keller looked at her for the first time that night like he was seeing her clearly and not liking what he saw. "Emily," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. "You were there. You can confirm it was a minor correction." Emily didn't answer. Whitman's eyes cut to her sharp and warning. "Say something." The agent followed their gaze. "Miss Hayes," he said evenly. "Is that correct?" Emily lifted her eyes and met his for the first time. The recognition was immediate, not dramatic, not overt, just a fractional tightening around his eyes, a subtle shift in stance, as if a puzzle piece had slid into place. "No," Emily said. The word carried, clean, unembellished. A murmur rippled through the ER. Keller stared at her, stunned. "Emily, think about what you're doing." "I am," she replied. Whitman stepped forward, her composure cracking. "You're overstepping again. You're not qualified to interpret." "I didn't interpret," Emily said quietly. "I observed." The agent inclined his head slightly. "Please continue." Emily took a breath. Patient intake times were altered to delay federal jurisdiction. The amendment removed an escalation note documenting violent resistance consistent with trained response. I was asked to sign off on it. I refused. The room felt suddenly very small. Whitman's face drained of color. "That's a lie." Emily didn't look at her. "It's not." The agent tapped his tablet once. "That matches our preliminary findings." Keller's shoulders slumped. Whitman rounded on Emily, fury replacing fear. "You think this makes you important?" Emily met her gaze at last. "No." "Then why?" Whitman demanded. Emily paused. Because this was the moment. The one that always mattered. Not the reveal, but the reason. "Because truth doesn't belong to the people with the most authority," Emily said. "It belongs to the people willing to protect it." The agent watched her closely now. He turned back to Whitman. "We'll need your office secured. Immediately." Whitman's voice shook. "On what grounds?" "On probable cause," he replied, "which your own actions have provided." 2 more agents entered through the doors, moving with quiet efficiency. One spoke into an earpiece. Another positioned himself near the elevators. Keller backed away slowly, eyes darting. "This is insane." "Sit down," the agent said. Keller didn't. He turned fast toward the staff corridor. Emily moved. Not aggressively. Not visibly. She stepped into his path just enough to block it. "Don't," she said softly. Keller froze. For a split second, instinct overrode fear. He reached for her arm. Emily deflected the motion with minimal force, rotating his wrist just enough to break his balance. He stumbled back, colliding with a chair and falling hard to the floor. The sound echoed. Gasps erupted. Security surged forward but stopped short when the agent raised a hand. Emily released Keller immediately and stepped back, palms open. "I advised him not to," she said evenly. The agent studied her, not the move, but the restraint. Whitman stared at Emily now like she was seeing a stranger. "Who are you?" Emily didn't answer. The agent did. "She's the reason this didn't get worse," he said. "And she's been holding this together longer than you realize." Whitman's voice dropped to a whisper. "Captain Hayes." The name hung in the air again, different this time. Heavier. Closer. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Then she nodded once. "Yes." The effect was immediate and absolute. Someone dropped a clipboard. A nurse pressed a hand to her mouth. Keller lay on the floor, staring up at her in disbelief. The agent stepped closer. "Captain Emily Hayes," he said formally. "We're here to extract you and secure the witness." Emily met his gaze. "After the patient is safe." A beat. Then the agent nodded. "Of course." Whitman sank into a chair, her authority evaporating in real time. Emily turned back toward the ICU corridor, already shifting focus. The hospital had treated her like a nobody. Now every eye followed her. And the night was far from over. The moment the name became real, the hospital changed. Not the walls or the lights, but the people. Their posture. Their voices. The way they suddenly recalculated every word they had ever spoken to the woman standing at the center of the room. Captain Emily Hayes didn't linger on it. She was already moving, "I see you first," she said, her tone calm but unmistakably directive. "If there's been record tampering, there may have been interference with medication orders." The FBI agent, Special Agent Daniel Ross, though she hadn't asked, fell into step beside her. "We have 2 teams securing admin and IT. Local PD is being held outside pending jurisdiction transfer." "Good," Emily said. "No one enters or exits ICU without clearance." Ross glanced at her. "You haven't been active in months." Emily didn't slow. "I never stopped being responsible." They reached the ICU doors. The 2 police officers stationed there straightened instinctively when they saw her, not because of the badge they didn't know about, but because something in her presence demanded it. "I need to see the patient," Emily said. One of the officers hesitated. "We were told Ross flashed his badge. You were told wrong." The doors opened. Inside, the air hummed with machines and quiet tension. The protected witness lay unconscious, IV lines, steady heart monitor ticking out a controlled rhythm. A nurse stood nearby, clipboard clutched tightly to her chest, eyes darting between Emily and the agents behind her. "Has anyone adjusted his meds in the last 30 minutes?" Emily asked. The nurse swallowed. "Dr. Keller authorized a dosage change earlier, but Emily prompted. "But it didn't make sense," the nurse admitted. "Lowered pain management, but increased sedatives. I questioned it. He told me to follow the order." Emily's jaw tightened. "Who entered the change into the system?" "Administration override," the nurse said quietly. "Miss Whitman's credentials." Ross exhaled through his nose. "That's enough." Emily leaned over the patient, scanning the monitor. "He's stable for now. Reverse the sedative adjustment." Slowly, the nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Emily caught the flicker of surprise at the honorific. She ignored it. As the nurse moved, Emily straightened and turned to Ross. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about control. They wanted him disoriented, unreliable. Ross nodded grimly. "He's scheduled to testify tomorrow morning." Emily looked back at the patient. Then tonight was their last chance. A sharp voice echoed from the hall. "You don't get to just take over my hospital." Laura Whitman stood outside the ICU doors, flanked by 2 security guards who looked deeply uncomfortable with their assignment. Her composure had shattered. The calm executive mask was gone, replaced by raw, furious desperation. "This is illegal," Whitman snapped. "You're violating protocol." Emily stepped out into the hallway. "Protocol doesn't apply when it's being used to obstruct justice," she said evenly. Whitman laughed bitterly. "Justice? You think this is about justice? This hospital runs on funding-influence relationships. You jeopardize that people suffer." Emily met her gaze. "People were already suffering. You just stopped noticing." Whitman's eyes flicked to Ross. "You're letting her do this." Ross didn't hesitate. "She's federal. And she's right." That landed harder than any accusation. Whitman's shoulders sagged for just a moment, then squared. "You think exposing this ends it? You think people like me fall quietly?" Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No. I think people like you assume silence will protect you." Whitman sneered. "And doesn't it?" Emily held her gaze. "Not when silence is broken by the truth." Behind them, Keller was being escorted down the hall, wrists cuffed, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. He caught Emily's eye as he passed. "You ruined everything," he hissed. Emily didn't respond. She watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet certainty. Consequences weren't personal. They were necessary. A young resident approached hesitantly. "Captain Hayes." "What happens now?" Emily turned to her. "Now you do your job. Honestly. And you document everything." The resident nodded, relief flooding her face. Ross checked his watch. "We've secured the server room. Data extraction in progress. Whitman's communications are extensive." Emily wasn't surprised. "What about you?" Ross asked. "Once this is over." Emily looked down the hall toward the ER, the place where she had been ignored, dismissed, ordered around like furniture. Staff now watched her, openly curiosity and shame mixing in their expressions. "I finish the mission," she said. "Then I disappear again." Ross studied her. "You could stay, testify, make this public." Emily shook her head. "This was never about me." A commotion erupted near the elevators, raised voices, hurried footsteps. One of the agents spoke urgently into his radio. "Agent Ross, we have a problem." Local PD supervisor is demanding access. Claims mayor's office involvement. Ross closed his eyes briefly. Of course they are. Emily's expression hardened. They won't get it. She moved toward the elevators, Ross following. The doors opened to reveal a uniformed police captain, red-faced and furious. You can't lock us out of a civilian hospital, he barked. This is our jurisdiction. Emily stepped forward before Ross could respond. Not tonight, she said calmly. The captain scoffed. And who are you supposed to be? Emily reached into her pocket and produced a badge she hadn't shown in years. She didn't shove it in his face. She held it at chest height, steady and unmistakable. Captain Emily Hayes, she said. Federal. The captain's anger drained away in real time. I suggest, Emily continued, you stand down before you complicate your own mourning. Silence followed. Then the captain nodded stiffly and stepped back. As the elevator doors closed, Ross let out a slow breath. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Emily said. I did. They returned to the ICU just as the nurse confirmed the patient's vitals had stabilized. Outside dawn crept toward the horizon, pale and indifferent. Emily stood alone for a moment, hands clasped behind her back, listening to the steady beep of the monitor. The hospital had tried to erase her. Instead, it had revealed itself, and the final reckoning was still coming. By the time the first hints of dawn pressed against the high windows of Street Catherine's medical center, the building felt like a crime scene pretending to be a hospital. Yellow evidence tags dotted corridors where no one had ever expected to see them. Federal agents moved quietly but decisively, their presence changing the rhythm of every room they entered. Computers were sealed, phones collected, access cards confiscated. Conversations stopped mid-sentence whenever an unfamiliar jacket passed by. Emily Hayes stood near the ICU nurses' station, watching it all unfold with an expression that revealed nothing. Inside her, the tension hadn't eased, it had sharpened. This was the dangerous part, not the reveal, not the confrontation, but the aftermath, when powerful people realized the shield they trusted had cracked and began looking for ways to survive the fallout. Special Agent Ross approached her, lowering his voice. We pulled Whitman's call logs. She wasn't acting alone. Emily nodded. She never would. There's pressure coming from outside the hospital. Legal firms, donors, political offices. Of course, Emily said. Hospitals like this don't exist in isolation. Ross hesitated. There's already talk of framing this as a misunderstanding, administrative overreach, rogue decision-making. Emily's eyes flicked toward the ICU room, and the witness, still stable. But if this turns into a narrative war, his testimony becomes a liability. Emily inhaled slowly. That's why they tried to destabilize him, she said. Not to kill him, to discredit him. Ross studied her. You're thinking 2 steps ahead. I learned the hard way, Emily replied. Down the hall, Laura Whitman sat under guard in a small conference room, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She stared straight ahead, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Confidence had drained from her posture, replaced by something raw and calculating. She was already planning. Emily knew the type. A junior nurse approached Emily hesitantly. Captain Hayes, can I ask you something? Emily turned. Of course. The nurse swallowed. Why didn't you say anything sooner? About who you were, Emily considered her answer carefully. Because the moment people know, she said, they stop showing you who they really are. The nurse nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. A commotion erupted near the administrative wing. Raised voices, footsteps moving too fast. Ross's radio crackled. Agent Ross, we've got an issue. Hospital legal counsel just arrived with a court order. Emily's jaw tightened. Already they're claiming improper seizure of private medical records. Emily exhaled. They're trying to slow you down. Ross grimaced. And it might work, at least temporarily. Emily looked toward the ICU again, then back to Ross. How much longer until the witness can be transferred? Minimum 2 hours, Ross said. Any faster risks, complications. Emily nodded once. Then we hold. As if summoned by the word, the hospital's lead attorney appeared expensive, suit-polished smile, eyes sharp with practiced aggression. You're exceeding your authority, he said smoothly, addressing Ross but glancing pointedly at Emily. This facility is protected, under Emily, stepped forward. Counsel, she said calmly. I suggest you choose your next words carefully, the attorney scoffed. And why would I take advice from? She produced her badge again. Just long enough. The attorney's smile faltered. I see. You're obstructing a federal investigation involving witness tampering, Emily continued. Every second you delay increases your exposure. The attorney cleared his throat. I'll review the order. He retreated. Ross watched him go, then looked at Emily. You didn't raise your voice. You don't need to, Emily said, when the truth is heavy enough. Minutes passed. Then more. The hospital staff moved through their duties like ghosts, unsure how to act now that the power dynamics had shifted. Some avoided Emily entirely. Others watched her with a mix of awe and regret. Dr. Keller was led past again, this time escorted toward a waiting vehicle outside. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. But his eyes found Emily one last time. Was it worth it, he asked bitterly. Emily met his gaze. For the patient, yes. He looked away. In the ICU, the witness stirred. Emily entered the room quietly, standing at the bedside as his eyes fluttered open. You're safe, she said softly. They can't reach you anymore. His voice was weak. You were the one. Emily nodded. I was assigned to make sure you got here. Didn't think it would cost this much. Emily leaned closer. The truth always costs something, but lies cost more. He closed his eyes, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Outside the room, Ross waited. They're preparing the transfer, he said. Helipad is being cleared. Emily glanced upward toward the roof she hadn't seen yet, but could already hear in her mind. Rotor blades, wind, finality. Down the hall, Laura Whitman finally broke her silence. You think this ends with me in cuffs, she called out. People like me don't fall alone. Emily turned slowly. No, she said. They fall when no one's left to protect them. Whitman laughed, hollow and brittle. You hid among us like we were nothing. Emily held her gaze. You treated people like nothing long before I arrived. A pause. Then Whitman looked away. As the sound of a helicopter began to build overhead, the hospital held its breath one last time. Emily stood at the center of it all, not triumphant, not angry, just resolved. The truth was no longer buried, and there was no going back. The sound reached the hospital before anyone saw it. A distant thrum at first, low, rhythmic, unmistakable, the kind of sound that didn't belong to sirens or ambulances. It rolled across the roof of street. Catherine's like an approaching storm, vibrating through concrete and steel, rattling ceiling panels in the upper floors. Heads turned, monitors continued to beep, phones continued to ring, but no one spoke. Emily Hayes felt it settle into her bones with a familiarity she hadn't expected to feel again so soon. The timing was precise, too precise to be coincidence. Helipads active, an agent said into his radio voice tight. Visual confirmed. Special Agent Ross exhaled slowly. That'll be our transport. Below the hospital reacted in waves. Security scrambled to establish a perimeter they should have secured hours ago. Nurses whispered to one another, eyes wide. Administrators pretended to be busy while inching closer to exits. The building, for all its size and reputation, suddenly felt very small. Emily moved toward the ICU doors as the sound intensified. Inside, the protected witness was awake now, eyes clearer, breathing steadier. The nurse adjusted his IV and stepped back when she saw Emily enter. They're ready, the nurse said softly. Emily nodded. Thank you. She leaned in close to the bed. This part will be loud, she said, but it's almost over. The man managed a weak nod. You kept your word. Yes, Emily said. I did. Outside the room, Laura Whitman was arguing again, this time with no one in particular. You can't evacuate a patient without hospital authorization, she snapped, voice echoing down the hall. Ross didn't look at her. We can, and we are. Whitman's eyes locked onto Emily. You orchestrated this. Emily turned slowly. No, I stopped you from sabotaging it. Whitman's laugh was sharp and brittle. You think this makes you righteous, Emily held her gaze. I think it makes me responsible. 2 agents entered the ICU with a transport gurney, designed for rapid evacuation. They moved, efficiently, practiced each motion, deliberate. Emily watched closely, not because she doubted them, but because old habits didn't die quietly. The doors burst open as the helicopter's rotor wash battered the roof above, sending vibrations down the stairwells. Dust fell from ceiling vents. A loose clipboard clattered to the floor. Somewhere, an alarm chirped. The witness was transferred carefully, every movement monitored. Emily stayed close, one hand steadying the gurney as it rolled into the hall. As they moved, the hospital staff parted instinctively. No one blocked their path. No one spoke. At the elevators, Ross shook his head. Stairs. Too risky. Emily agreed. Southwell stairwell. Least exposure. They pushed through the heavy door, ascending quickly as the helicopter's roar grew deafening. Wind rushed down the stairwell in chaotic bursts, carrying the smell of fuel and cold night air. At the top, the door to the roof was already open. The scene beyond it froze everyone who saw it. The helicopter crouched low on the pad lights, blazing against the dark sky, rotor blades slicing the air into violent waves. 2 armed federal operators stood guard near the open side door, scanning the perimeter. Emily stepped out first, shielding her eyes briefly against the wind. For a moment, time seemed to slow. She hadn't been here for recognition, or vindication, or spectacle. But the spectacle came anyway. Below, through the glass walls of the upper floor, staff pressed closer, drawn by the sound, the light, the impossible reality unfolding above them. Some raised phones, hands shaking. Others simply stared. The gurney was rolled forward. The witness was secured inside the aircraft with practiced efficiency. As the agents finished, Ross turned to Emily. "We're clear. You're coming with us." Emily hesitated. She looked back toward the stairwell door, the hospital beyond it. "What about Whitman?" she asked. Ross's expression hardened. "She's being detained pending formal arrest. Keller too. Evidence is already being logged." Emily nodded. "Good." She took one last look at the city skyline, pale now with the first hints of morning. Then she stepped into the helicopter. As the door slid shut, the roar intensified, sealing them into a cocoon of noise and motion. The aircraft lifted smoothly, rising above the hospital that had tried to bury the truth within its walls. Below Street, Catherine's grew smaller. Emily removed her badge and held it loosely in her hand, the metal cool against her palm. Ross watched her. "You disappeared for a reason." "Yes," Emily said, "because titles change how people listen." And now Emily looked out the window. Now they've heard enough. The helicopter banked toward the east, disappearing into the thinning night. Inside the hospital, the silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier, permanent. From the air, Street, Catherine's medical center looked peaceful, an island of light in a city slowly waking to morning. Cars traced thin lines along the roads below. Somewhere people were pouring coffee, checking their phones, starting ordinary days. None of them knew what had just cracked open inside that building. Inside the helicopter, the noise was constant, pressing absolute. Yet for Emily Hayes, the world felt strangely quiet. She sat across from the protected witness, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the faint tremor in his hands easing as the aircraft stabilized. He looked at her through the dim interior lighting. "They won't reach me now." "No," Emily said. "They won't." Across from her, Special Agent Ross reviewed updates on a secured tablet. His jaw tightened as lines of text scrolled past. "Whitman's counsel is already spinning," he said, calling this a procedural misunderstanding. Emily didn't look surprised. "That's her last defense." Ross glanced up. "You sure you don't want to testify?" Publicly, Emily considered the question. For a moment, the hum of the rotors blended with memories she hadn't allowed herself to revisit: committee rooms, microphones, the sharp smell of polish and old paper. People listening only long enough to decide how little they cared. "I've testified before," she said quietly. "The truth survives better when it doesn't rely on one voice." Ross nodded slowly. The helicopter touched down at a secure federal facility outside the city. As the doors opened, cool morning air rushed in, sharp and clean. The witness was transferred swiftly, surrounded by personnel who knew exactly how fragile this moment was. Emily stepped away as they disappeared into the building. Her role there was finished, or so it seemed. Back at Street, Catherine's, the fallout hit like a delayed shockwave. Federal agents remained on site, cataloging evidence, interviewing staff, freezing accounts. News vans clustered outside the main entrance now. Antennas raised reporters speaking urgently into cameras. The hospital's name crawled across early morning news tickers alongside words no institution wanted attached to it: investigation, tampering, federal custody. Inside, Laura Whitman sat in an interrogation room that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. She stared at the table, hands folded, eyes dry. Across from her, an agent slid a folder forward. "We've reviewed your communications." Whitman didn't touch it. "You coordinated record changes," the agent continued. "You pressured staff to falsify documentation. You attempted to interfere with a protected witness." Whitman exhaled slowly. "You're simplifying." "Am I?" the agent asked. Whitman finally looked up. "Hospitals survive on influence. You think donors don't expect discretion. You think politicians don't call favors due. I protected this place." "You protected yourself," the agent replied. Whitman's mouth tightened. "And what about her?" she demanded suddenly. "Emily Hayes. You let her walk in here and tear everything apart." The agent leaned back. She exposed what was already broken. Whitman laughed softly, bitter. "She hid among us, pretended to be small." "No," the agent said. "You made her small. There's a difference." In another room, Dr. Keller sat hunched forward, hands cuffed, staring at the floor. "I didn't know," he kept repeating. "I didn't know who she was." An agent frowned. "Does that matter?" Keller's shoulders sagged. "I would have listened." The agent closed his notebook. "That's the point, Doctor. You should have listened anyway." By mid-morning, Emily Hayes stood alone in a quiet hallway of the federal facility, a plain jacket replacing the hospital scrubs she had worn only hours earlier. Her hair was pulled back the same way, her posture unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. Ross approached, holding a thin envelope. "Your official extraction paperwork and a temporary clearance reinstatement." Emily took it without opening it. Temporary. Ross smiled faintly. "Nothing about you is temporary." She studied his face. "What happens next? Whitman and Keller will be charged. The hospital board will claim ignorance. There'll be hearings, quiet settlements." Emily nodded. "And the staff? Some will say they had no idea," Ross said. "Some will say they always suspected. A few will admit they were afraid." Emily looked down the hall as if she could still see the ER, the chaos, the dismissive looks, the quiet moments where choices were made. Fear, she knew, was contagious. So was courage. "She wasn't wrong about one thing," Emily said suddenly. Ross raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "Power doesn't disappear," Emily said. "It just changes shape." Ross considered that. "And what shape are you choosing?" Emily didn't answer right away. She thought of the nurse who had questioned the medication order, the resident who had asked what happened next, the moment in the ER when no one had looked at her, and the moment later when everyone had. "I choose to stay unseen," she said finally, "but not unheard." Ross extended a hand. "If you ever need backup," Emily shook it briefly. "I know where to find you." Hours later, as the city fully woke, Emily walked out of the facility alone. No cameras followed her. No one called her name. She blended back into the world with the same precision she had always used. But somewhere inside Street, Catherine's medical center, a quiet truth had been carved into the walls, a reminder that authority without integrity was hollow, and that the people deemed invisible were often the ones holding everything together. Emily Hayes didn't look back. She didn't need to. The reckoning had already begun. The morning after the helicopter lifted off did not bring relief to Street Catherine's medical center. It brought exposure. By 9:00 a.m., the hospital's main lobby had transformed into a controlled chaos of press badges, camera rigs, and tense security lines. Administrators who had once moved through these halls with unchallenged authority now avoided eye contact, whispering into phones, their words clipped and defensive. Inside a sealed conference room on the third floor, the hospital's board convened in emergency session. Laura Whitman's chair sat empty. The absence spoke louder than any accusation. Federal agents projected timelines onto the wall intake logs, altered timestamps, authorization chains that led back to a single point of failure. Each slide stripped away another layer of plausible deniability. "This wasn't a single bad decision," an agent said flatly. "It was a pattern." A board member cleared his throat. "We trusted our executive team. The agent met his gaze. Trust isn't a defense. Across the city in a quiet federal building, Emily Hayes watched none of it. She sat alone in a sparsely furnished room, hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The jacket she wore bore no insignia, no rank, no name, just fabric and function. Special Agent Ross entered, closing the door softly behind him. "They're unraveling," he said, faster than expected. Emily nodded once. "They always do when the structure is built on silence." Ross studied her. "You were the pressure point. I was the witness," Emily corrected. "The pressure came from their own choices." Ross leaned against the table. "The U.S. Attorney wants a statement. Not public. Internal. Your assessment of Whitman's role." Emily considered it. "I'll give them facts. Nothing more." "That's enough," Ross said. A pause followed. "You could have stayed hidden," Ross added. "Let someone else trip the wire." Emily's gaze sharpened slightly. "Then I'd be responsible for what happened next." Ross didn't argue. Hours later, Emily stood in a small observation room overlooking a holding corridor. Laura Whitman was being escorted past, no blazer now, no confident stride. Just a woman wrapped in the quiet shock of consequences arriving all at once. Whitman didn't look up, but Emily watched. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, with clarity. This was what unchecked authority looked like when it finally met resistance. Smaller, frailer, human. Dr. Keller passed soon after, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed. He glanced up and froze when he saw Emily through the glass. For a moment he looked like he wanted to speak, then he looked away. Emily turned from the window. Outside, the world moved on. By early afternoon, the protected witness was relocated again, this time under full federal guard, his testimony locked behind layers of security. The immediate threat had passed, but the larger fight was only beginning. At Street, Catherine's staff gathered in small clusters, speaking in low voices. "I heard the FBI pulled everything," one nurse whispered. "They arrested Whitman," another replied. "Right in her office." A third shook her head. "I can't believe it was happening right in front of us." One voice cut through the murmurs, quieter but steadier. "It was always happening. We just didn't want to see it." That sentence lingered. In the days that followed, internal reviews began. Policies were rewritten. Oversight committees formed. Apologies were drafted, careful, legalistic, insufficient. But something more subtle shifted too. A nurse questioned an order instead of complying silently. A resident documented a concern instead of letting it slide. A junior staff member spoke up in a meeting where they would have stayed quiet before. None of them mentioned Emily Hayes by name. They didn't need to. Back at the federal facility, Emily prepared to leave. Ross met her at the exit. "Your clearance is suspended again. Officially." Emily smiled faintly. "As expected." But Ross added, "Your file is flagged. If something like this surfaces again anywhere, you'll be contacted." Emily accepted the envelope he handed her. "I hope it won't be necessary." Ross studied her. "So do I, but it usually is." They shook hands once more. Emily stepped outside into the afternoon sun, squinting slightly as light replaced fluorescent glare. The city hummed around her, traffic, voices, the ordinary noise of life continuing. She blended into it easily. No one pointed. No one stared. No one knew that a woman who had been treated like a nobody less than 24 hours earlier had quietly dismantled a system built to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And that was exactly how she wanted it. As she walked, her phone vibrated one last time. "Unknown number, witness secure. Charges proceeding. You did good." Emily typed back a single word. "Emily done." She slipped the phone away and kept walking. Behind her, the machinery of justice turned slow, imperfect, but moving. And somewhere inside a hospital that would never quite feel the same again, people would remember the night silence stopped protecting the wrong people. 3 days later, Street, Catherine's medical center, stood quieter than it ever had. Not empty, never that, but subdued, like a place that had learned something it couldn't unlearn. The usual rush of footsteps still echoed through the corridors. Monitors still beeped. Pages still called names overhead. Yet beneath the routine, attention lingered, subtle and persistent. People were paying attention now. In a small auditorium on the second floor, Hospital staff gathered for a mandatory meeting. Nurses in scrubs, residents clutching coffee, administrators sitting straighter than usual. The interim director, appointed less than 48 hours earlier, stood at the podium, voice careful and measured. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities," he said. "An external review board has been established. All concerns regarding patient care, documentation, or ethical conduct will be addressed without retaliation." Without retaliation. The words were chosen deliberately. Murmurs moved through the room, skeptical, hopeful, afraid. Near the back, a young nurse raised her hand. "What happens if we were told to follow orders we knew were wrong?" The director hesitated. Then slowly, "Then those orders should have been challenged, and going forward they must be." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the first honest one many of them had heard in years. Across town, Emily Hayes sat in a quiet cafe, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of her. She wore jeans and a plain jacket now, hair loose around her shoulders. To anyone watching, she looked like another customer killing time before work. She watched the door out of habit. On the muted television above the counter, a local news segment played footage of Street Catherines. The headline scrolled beneath the image, "Hospital leadership under federal investigation following whistleblower revelations." Whistleblower. Emily looked away. That word implied exposure for recognition, a desire to be seen. She had wanted neither. Her phone buzzed once. Ross board voted this morning. Whitman terminated. Keller's license suspended pending review. Emily exhaled slowly. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Completion. She typed back, "Emily and the staff." A pause. Then Ross. "They're talking. That matters." Emily slipped the phone into her pocket. At Street Catherine's, Dr. Keller's office had already been cleared. His nameplate removed. His certifications boxed and labeled for evidence. A young resident stood in the doorway, staring at the empty shelves. "He always said speaking up would ruin us," the resident murmured to a colleague. The colleague shook her head. Turns out staying silent did more damage. In the ICU, the nurse who had questioned the medication order days earlier adjusted a patient's chart, hand steady. She paused, reread an entry, then corrected a dosage notation that didn't sit right with her. No one told her to. She simply did it. That afternoon, Laura Whitman was formally charged. The press reported it in neat paragraphs, dates, statutes, quotes from official statements. What they didn't capture was the moment the handcuffs clicked closed, or the way her shoulders had sagged just slightly, as if she finally understood that influence had limits. In the holding area, Whitman asked a single question. Did she testify? The agent shook his head. She didn't need to. Whitman looked down at her hands. Emily learned about it later secondhand. She felt no urge to see Whitman again. Their conversation had ended the moment the truth became unavoidable. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily walked along a quiet stretch of sidewalk near the river. The city reflected in the water, fragmented, distorted, beautiful in its own way. She thought about the nurse who had asked her why she stayed silent for so long. Because the moment people know who you are, they stop being honest. That truth still held. Her phone vibrated again. Ross. One more thing. Interim director asked if you'd consider consulting. Quietly. Emily stopped walking. Consulting meant proximity, influence, visibility even in shadow. She stared at the water for a long moment. Emily. No. A beat passed. Ross, I figured. Had to ask. Emily typed one last message. Emily. But tell them this, systems don't change because of one person. They change because people decide silence isn't safer anymore. She sent it and powered the phone down. At Street Catherine's, the meeting ended. Staff filtered back into the halls, conversations softer but more direct than before. A culture didn't shift overnight, but cracks had formed in the old one and light was getting through. As night settled over the city, Emily sat alone on a bench, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and water moving steadily past stone. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a symbol. She was a reminder. And reminders didn't need applause. They just needed to exist. 1 week later, Street Catherine's Medical Center woke to a different kind of morning. There were no cameras this time. No federal jackets in the halls. no whispered panic hiding behind professional smiles. The building hummed the way hospitals were supposed to: urgent, imperfect, alive. But something fundamental had shifted. In the ER, a junior resident paused before signing off on an intake note. He reread the vitals, frowned, then flagged an inconsistency and asked for a second opinion. The attending didn't snap at him, didn't roll his eyes. He listened. In radiology, a technician questioned why a scan had been downgraded in priority. The explanation didn't sit right. She escalated it. The patient was scanned within minutes instead of hours. No one punished her. On the third floor, where Laura Whitman's office had once overlooked the city like a throne, the blinds were open for the first time in years. The room had been repurposed into a shared oversight workspace, temporary, symbolic, intentional, glass walls instead of opaque ones. Visibility mattered now, not because someone demanded it, because people had seen what happened when there was none. Across town, Emily Hayes packed lightly, a small duffel bag, clothes folded with military precision. Nothing sentimental, nothing unnecessary. Her life had always fit into tight margins. This was no different. She checked the time: 6:42 a.m., then slipped the room key onto the table of the modest motel she'd been staying in. No front desk conversation, no receipt needed. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain on asphalt. Morning traffic rolled past, unaware of how close it had come to swallowing a truth whole. Emily walked without urgency. Her phone buzzed once as she crossed the street. She didn't look at it immediately. She had learned long ago that not every message deserved to interrupt the present. At the edge of a small park, she stopped and sat on a bench watching joggers pass, headphones in lives intact. Only then did she check the screen. Ross. Final update. Witness testified this morning. Solid. Unshakable. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Not relief. Release. Emily. Good. A pause. Ross. He asked about you. Emily stared at the word asked longer than necessary. Emily. Tell him he did the hard part. Another pause. Ross. He already knows. Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket. She watched a young couple argue softly near a coffee cart, their disagreement ordinary and forgettable. A city worker swept leaves from a sidewalk that would be dirty again by afternoon. Life moved forward. It always did. At Street Catherine's, a quiet ceremony took place in the ICU break room. No press, no speeches, just coffee, mismatched chairs, and a sense of shared understanding. The nurse who had questioned the medication order stood awkwardly near the wall as the interim director approached her. I wanted to thank you, he said, for speaking up. The nurse nodded, unsure what to do with the praise. I almost didn't. But you did, he replied. That mattered. She thought of Emily Hayes, then not the title, not the reveal, but the calm voice that had told her she wasn't wrong to question what didn't feel right. That memory stayed with her. By afternoon, official notices were posted throughout the hospital. New reporting channels, whistleblower protections, mandatory ethics reviews. The language was formal, careful, but the intent was clear. Silence was no longer the safest option. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, Emily stood at a bus terminal on the edge of the city. She checked the destination board once, then again, not because she was unsure, but because old habits lingered. The bus pulled in with a hiss of brakes and tired hydraulics. She boarded, chose a seat near the back, and set her bag at her feet. No one recognized her. No one needed to. As the bus rolled forward, the city slid past the window glass towers, giving way to older buildings, then to stretches of road where stories blended into one another, anonymous and infinite. Emily rested her head lightly against the seat. She thought of the ER, the chaos, the dismissive voices the moment the FBI walked in and asked for a name no one expected to hear attached to her. They had treated her like a nobody, not because she was weak, but because they had learned to mistake quiet for insignificance. The bus merged onto the highway, carrying her away from street. Catherine's away from a place that would remember her without ever fully knowing her. That was enough. Somewhere behind her, a hospital learned that power without accountability was fragile. Somewhere ahead, another place would make the same mistake. And Emily Hayes would be ready not for recognition, not for credit, but for the moment when silence needed someone willing to break it. There's a quiet lie we're taught early in life that power always looks loud, confident, and important, that the people who matter most are the ones with titles, corner offices, or the final word in the room. But this story reminds us of a deeper truth. Real power often stands silently in the background, waiting for the right moment to act. Emily wasn't ignored because she was incapable. She was ignored because people stopped seeing her as human the moment they decided she was small. And that's how injustice survives in the real world, not through evil villains, but through everyday silence, through people who know something is wrong yet convince themselves it's safer to look away. The hardest thing isn't standing up when everyone supports you. The hardest thing is standing up when no one does, when it costs comfort, security, or belonging. This story isn't just about a hidden identity. It's about moral courage, about choosing integrity when no one is watching, about understanding that silence can protect the wrong people, while one honest voice spoken at the right moment can change everything. So ask yourself this: if you were in that hospital, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have spoken up even if it meant standing alone? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and whether you've ever been underestimated in your own life. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more waiting to be told.